Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Black Resistance, Education and Community. I'm Hillary Plate from the City of Virginia Beach Cultural Affairs. And as the person responsible for public programming and cultural partnerships, it is my privilege to collaborate with distinguished leaders in our region in the areas of arts, humanities, and equity. We're so proud to work with Norfolk State University, Princess Anne County Training School, Union Kempsville High School Alumni Association, and Virginia African American Cultural Center for the third season of these virtual discussions. We started with Black History Month 2020 in the midst of COVID, and now in season 3, we honor and learn more about Black resistance in the past and present through 4 year-round engagements. In February, we held oral history gathering events during Black History Month. Some of the excerpts of that event you will see here, produced by Dr. Richmond and her class of young interviewers and documentarians, followed by 3 virtual events in June, today, September, and December that will illuminate different facets of Black resistance, from today's education and community panel to panels on law and press, arts, culture, and performance. Leading us on this journey are 2 women for whom I have the utmost respect and gratitude. As I introduce them each session, I'm always in awe that I am permitted to sit among them to collaborate on these projects. Dr. Stephanie Richmond is our webinar host, and she is the Associate Professor of History and the Director of the Joseph Jenkins Roberts Center for African Diaspora Studies at Norfolk State University. She is the Project Director of the Soul Downriver Program funded by the Mellon Foundation and the Virginia African American Cultural Center. Our moderator today is the renowned Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander, Endowed Professor of Black History, of Virginia Black History and Culture, Emeritus Director of the Joseph Jenkins Roberts Center for African Diaspora Studies, and Senior Scholar and Co-founder of the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. Esteemed guests, please welcome Dr. Richmond and Dr. Newby Alexander.
Thank you so much. We are always happy to partner with our friends at the City of Virginia Beach Cultural Affairs and History Museums, and particularly the PACTS Alumni Association. I want to go over a little bit of webinar etiquette. Okay, there we go. Thank you. For participation today, if you have any questions for our panelists, and we encourage you to ask them, please type them in the Q&A tab in the webinar. And if you want to ask those questions of a particular panelist, please include that in your question. Do keep all your questions and comments short and on topic. Any profanity or inappropriate comments to the Q&A are not permitted and will result in you being removed from the webinar. And if you are having technical issues during the webinar, please exit the webinar, fully close your browser or Zoom, and then re-enter. That usually fixes most of them. Our NSU policies for online participation of all kinds are to be respectful, be mindful, and be professional. Thank you. So I want to give a quick introduction to our oral history project that we worked with Princess Anne County Training School, Union Kempsville High School alumni back in February. We interviewed more than 20 alumni on a rainy February morning about their experiences in high school, in the community in Princess Anne County in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, and about the role education has played in their lives and their success. It was an amazing experience for the 10 Norfolk State University history majors who were able to participate. They asked questions. They were actually the ones who wrote the questions for the interviews as well beforehand, and learned how to operate recording equipment to do so. I have selected 3 clips from some of our interviews. I've got 7 of the interviews fully edited and up on YouTube, which you can find on the Joseph Jenkins Roberts YouTube channel if you are interested in watching more. But I picked these 3 clips that spoke to our topic today, education and community. So each of these alumni, Maurice Garvey, Samuel Johns, and Vivian Parker, talked about the role of community in their education. And I will say they're a little quiet at times, so you may want to turn your microphone up just a little bit.
My general area where I lived at, a lot of the teachers lived in that area. So it was like family oriented because not only your parents, but they pushed and strive, to keep you trying to go ahead. A lot of the teachers, in fact, 90% of my teachers, we were very close.
That's really good.
If I got in trouble, they would, when I came along, it was segregated, not integrated. So you had to, how do I say it? Well, you couldn't go there, you couldn't go there, so you had to stay within your perimeter, to a degree, and this, I think probably, how do I say, it, at that particular time was good.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because you knew everybody. This day and time, you don't know anybody anymore. And it's they don't care whether you do or do not. But like I said, back in my day and time, the teachers wanted you to strive forward.
That's why I didn't know at the time, but why I really liked that time, because we had one school for us. And that's where everybody in Virginia Beach that's from my area, they knew everybody. And I used to wonder why you go see somebody, they say, "What's your name?" And I tell them my name. "Oh, you so-and-so son." And I go home and ask Daddy, "How do people know you?" And all that. He said, "Man, everybody know everybody." He didn't explain to me right, but you had that one school, and most of the time the little churches they had during that time, they always mingled and stuff. So that's why most people from Virginia Beach, Prince and Canada rather, knew everybody, that's from there. And right now I know everybody, if they're from there, been there, or went out of school, if I don't know them, I know their family. So a lot of people that come since then, moved from other places. I don't know, but it was nice then. A lot of people think it was bad, but I thought it was good for us because we had our own little beaches. We didn't have to have no racial problem there because everybody looked alike. We had Seaview, and that was a wonderful beach to me. Seaview and Parker's Beach was a beach right beside it. But Parker's Beach, you just park and you go in the water and swim. And a lot of guys would just sneak on over to Seaview because Seaview did have something. We thought it was a whole lot of stuff because we didn't go to the other park. We had a little roller, no, we didn't have a roller coaster. We had bumping cars, little boats, and the biggest thing we had was the swings and the Ferris wheel. And a little game arcade. It was real nice. Real nice. People go out there and they will bring their lunches, bring their dinner. They will make little tents out of sheets and sticks and stuff. And when it get hot, they climb in there and go in the sun. So it was really nice back there.
Sounds like fun.
It was, to me it was really fun. I miss those days. I tell you the truth, it's not about University, but I went to a trip down in Florida. Really went to Kings Bay, Georgia when I was working. Went to a beach called Fernandina Beach. It was a black beach. And it brought back memories to me. This was in '82 because they had a beach like that, but they had a dance hall. That was the biggest thing they had for us, dance hall, and they cooked that chicken. You could smell that chicken everywhere. But they had a beach. That beach water would go way out. People would park out where the water was. They would come get the car. It would float on out. But it was real nice back in them days. But that doing segregation, like I said, we didn't really want for that stuff. Probably wanted for equal employment and stuff like that. But for us, your recreation, we had it because Chesapeake had a beach called Sunset Lake Park. That was an all-black beach. Newport News, I don't know, I forget the name of that beach. No, Bay Shore. That's what I tell people now. Bay Shore people, everybody think of Buck Road. Buck Road is the beach right next to it.
No, my mom, she's out there. She's 95. I think she went as far as the 10th or 11th grade. But that woman is so dynamic. She can still count in her head, quicker than I can get down. My father, he just went to elementary school. I think it was sixth grade, something like that. But he died in 1998. But they instilled the values in us to go, to continue, and not to give up.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a quick correction. I apparently misspelled Mr. John's first name on the slides. His name is Samuel, not Samuel.
Thank you so very much, Stephanie. Your work and the work of your students on this particular project are indeed commendable. These are the kinds of projects that make what we do at Norfolk State resonate with the community and resonate with historians around the country. We're constantly inundated with questions because Virginia has been seen by many people as the mother of African Americans. And in so many ways, all roads lead back to Virginia. And so this kind of history really is reflective of the history that we see in other places. And so thank you so much for your work. And we're looking forward to a final project that we know will be coming soon. And with that, you know, this is the season for Juneteenth, and we would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about Juneteenth. A lot of people know very little about it, and so I thought this would be a great opportunity, since we're talking about education and community, to also bring in this important commemoration called Juneteenth. It is now a federal holiday, and it was made a federal holiday so fast. And so many states, like the Commonwealth of Virginia, made it also a statewide holiday. And there are other areas doing just that. Some of the impetus for doing this had to do with the widespread global support of the protests against the murder of George Floyd. And even though there are some who want to perhaps stop this progress of racial reconciliation, Juneteenth is an opportunity for us to understand that freedom and those who receive freedom came at very different times for a lot of people. And how do you exactly define freedom? Is it just freedom from slavery? Is it freedom from oppression? Is it freedom from discrimination? Is it freedom to choose who you love? Is it freedom to choose, period? And so there are many different levels of freedom. And so Juneteenth is a reminder to everyone in this nation that slavery certainly did not end with the Emancipation Proclamation issuance on January 1st, 1863. It did not end with even though legally it ended with the passage of the 13th Amendment, but we know from numerous books, documentaries, and so forth, that there were many people still in this country held in bondage for up to 80 years after the 13th Amendment was ratified. And so we want to take this time to remember Juneteenth and how important this commemoration is. And I wanted to just give background. This is a picture of General Gordon Granger, and it was under his leadership that in an initial group of 800 soldiers landed at Galveston, Texas. Texas was an area that was very difficult initially for the Union to hold, in part because they didn't commit the troops there. The majority of the battles actually occurred in Virginia because you had the Confederacy, the head of the Confederacy, the capital of Confederacy was Richmond, and a short distance from Richmond was the capital of the nation, Washington, D.C. So most of the battles occurred right here in Virginia. But it was after the war that a number of troops were not actually discharged from the military, but instead were reassigned to Texas and to the Gulf Coast of Texas in particular. And that's where Granger read the general order to ensure that people understood, it was General Order number 3, that people understood that slavery was through the proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, that slavery had ended. And because Texas was now being occupied by the Union government or by the United States government, slavery was at an end through the Emancipation Proclamation. And as these states reconstructed, then they would come under the direct auspices of the Constitution, not just because of the wartime situation under the control of the commander-in-chief. And that's why the 13th Amendment part was important. The other part was that there was still slavery going on in states that allowed slavery but had not seceded, what we call the border states. And so this general order was very, very important. But one thing that you may not know is that the Army sent troops on not only into Galveston, Texas, but they sent them to Brazos Island, to Santiago. They sent them even to Mexico because there were battles going on there. This was not a simple little, oh, they sent them there and all the fighting stopped. There were a number of Confederate troops who refused to stop fighting. And so making sure that that the Union troops were there and that they were taking control of that region was critical. And of course, wherever the troops went, the United States troops, you would see people, refugees, fleeing to their camps. What the government back in 1861, first starting with General Benjamin Butler at Fort Monroe, and then being adopted by Congress, what they did was they called all of these individuals contrabands of war. But they were refugees and they were fleeing to the camps, and some of them then ended up getting enlisted in the military, but for the most part, they were seeking the protection of the Union Army. Mention, if you are a Virginian, or your family were Virginians, many of these troops were reorganized into essentially the 25th Corps. That was made up almost entirely of African-American troops, and they were sent to Los Brazos and other areas and were incredibly important to ensuring that Texas came under the authority of the United States government and that many African Americans were freed. Now, of course, since that time, since 1865, we would see ongoing violence occurring against African Americans. And so you may ask the question, why then would African Americans want to remember this very harsh, very violent time period? Because many ex-Confederates were furious with the end of the Civil War and the fact that African Americans were seen as free. But what is it that they did? They saw this period, this June 19th, which came to Juneteenth. They saw this as a source of strength and inspiration, that the enduring spirit of African Americans would continue despite the violence, despite the history of slavery, despite the discrimination. It really resounded as a clarion call to continue to move forward. And that's why the whole idea of Juneteenth has been embraced by many people in this country and was embraced by President Joe Biden as something important for America to remember, that freedom did not begin in 1776, and it did not begin in 1861 or 1865, that freedom is an ongoing thing, and that our nation is built on this idea of freedom. But of course, freedom has to often be won using a variety of things. Now, unfortunately, I just finished clicking on the wrong thing. And so if you give me just a minute, I will click on the correct device to get started with our next session. So give me a sec. Okay, thank you. That's what happens when your mouse goes in other different directions. So I would like to start off by introducing our two esteemed panelists to our session. And I'd like to begin by introducing the Honorable Beryl D. Anderson, who is the founder and president of Anderson Global, which provides communications, speech writing, business consulting, and other expertise to a wide variety of people. She is the former Ohio Deputy Secretary of State. And at the time that she occupied that position, she was the highest ranking African-American female in Ohio at that time. And she has continued her work serving in the on city council in her city of Gahanna, Ohio. But you know, she's a graduate of Wellesley College. She is also a graduate of the University of Virginia School of Law. She has actually served on with a number of people, including she was the former international communications director for Rosa Parks. So she traveled the country, really understanding what was going on as it related to Parks's important story. We know that there's a lot of mythology about Rosa Parks, and she was trying to actually address all of that mythology. She was too tired, and that's why she didn't get up. That's a lot of foolishness, but that was created to give an impression that segregation and discrimination, especially in public transportation, was not as bad as it was. Beryl D. Anderson also served as part of the U.S. Supreme Court Press Corps. She served as a protege for the Third Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals judge, A. Leon Higginbotham, who wrote some of the most incredibly important work, including in the matter of color. If you ever want to question or have a deep dive into what people call critical race theory, all you have to do is read that book in the matter of color, and you will walk away having perhaps a very different understanding of what critical race theory is all about. She has also taught legal and communications classes at Hampton University, the Carter G. Woodson Institute, and the History Department at the University of Virginia. And with all these things that she does, she still has time to continue being a vocalist and a flautist. And so welcome, Honorable Beryl D. Anderson. Our next panelist is Dr. Holly A. Pinheiro, Jr., who is an assistant professor of African American history at Furman University. And his research is really on the cutting edge of what a lot of scholars are doing today. It focuses on this intersectionality between race, gender, and class, but especially in the military, something that has been ignored. For so long, military historians were only focusing on the battles and the battles fought by the generals, rather than the people who were actually involved in the battles. And as a result of that, so many African Americans and so many African American families were left out of the discussion. But his work, which has received numerous awards and attention, entitled The Family's Civil War, Black Soldiers and the Fight for Racial Justice, has been an incredibly important introduction for all of us into what was actually happening in the Civil War. And hopefully other works similar to that will come out from Dr. Pinheiro as he, begins to find that people are going to ask him more questions about different wars and what's going on with Black families during these various wars. His research has really focused on and revealed a lot of the history of African American veterans and their families. And he has also looked at these the instabilities that have resulted from a lot of racism and discrimination as African American families have been moved from place to place, or the husbands who were serving in the military, or in some cases, the wives who were serving in the military, as they would be assigned to different places, what the challenges that their families were facing. And so much of that we would see during the Indian Wars, beginning in 1866 and continuing on forward. He started some preliminary work for a new monograph examining Pennsylvania-born soldiers who trained at Camp William Penn. He has been interviewed by a number of prestigious organizations: CNN, History Channel, NPR, Smithsonian, Curiosity Streams, the Washington Post, the New York Times. We want to really welcome Dr. Holly Pinheiro and the Honorable Beryl D. Anderson. And so what I would like to do is get busy with the questions, because we have a lot to talk about, and I am really interested in finding their answers, and hopefully you are as well. So, panelists, I'm going to direct the questions to all of you first, and then I'm going to direct the question to individuals. But at any point in time, please feel free, if it's not your question, but you want to say something, please feel free to say something. So this first question is to all of you. The definition of Black resistance. And before you answer that question, I want to tell everyone that the Association for the Study of African American Life and History is the one that started Negro History Week. And they continue to create themes each year for African American history. And so our theme, of course, is Black resistance, but we're looking at education and the community as a part of this. So with that being said, what is really then the definition of Black resistance from your perspective?
I didn't know. Beryl, did you want to go first?
My answer is short, sweet, and to the point. Thank you for offering. Black resistance is the fight against racial inequality, racism, implicit bias, and historic and current disadvantages. And that fight could be an assertive fight, but it also can be implicit with things that people don't necessarily see on the table. And with that comes the ability to do introspection and have a strong sense of self. Because part of having a fight, regardless of how that fight comes about, you have to have confidence in yourself, be self-assured, which is basically the same thing, and be mentally tough, as we've seen throughout history with the resistances we will talk about, from the sit-ins to SNCC to CORE, all of that. You have to have a strong sense of self, because all kinds of things will come at you. And some of the folks were even trained to deal with the negative things, knowing that if they fought back, there would be even greater ramifications. So that's my short, sweet, and to the point response.
All right. Firstly, the introductions were amazing. I feel like I need Cassandra to do all of mine going forward, because I was so hyped by the end. I mean, the short version, if I was in like full teacher mode, would be firstly is like Black resistance is beautiful, right? And that Black resistance is diverse. It actually gets back to the point you had said before about how we're defining freedom, right? And I think I want to continue that point about the resistance takes on many forms. When I'm in, I think of me as the student, I thought of resistance in the very radical sense of like being visible and, doing these things. And as I get older and my body starts to do what it's doing. And my resistance takes on different forms that even some of my students sometimes are like, are you going to go out there march? I'm like, I have bad knees, so probably not. But that doesn't mean I am not still engaged in these moments. I think I would also include strength, right? And that strength is a word that I use very diverse, not just physical, emotional, getting back to Beryl's point, psychological, spiritual, however you define it, agency, right? And that just really gets to the core of what I do as a scholar, but I think as a person. Even a recent conversation I had with a relative of mine who was saying, asking me how I do the work I do, knowing it's hard, right? To talk about people who have historically been oppressed, and not just talking Black people, talking the history of women, Indigenous people, you name it. And for me, I say, we're here right now when we shouldn't be the way we live in this moment. And I look at the efforts of our relatives, of our community members, of the people I see on the street, the people I have the privilege of researching and teaching on, their strength in the face of all of that, that keeps me going. Because when I'm talking to my students, as honest as I can be, if I put myself into historical moments, I am not as strong as those people, right? Like if we were to just use Harriet Tubman, right? And I don't say like she is amazing. And I always pose her to my students and say, right, she's liberated you and others. She's saying, I'm going back. Are you going? Because I tell them, I don't think I could. But that to me demonstrates her strength that she's like, I am going back multiple times, right? And so just to me, it's like really understanding that the resistance takes on different forms. And someone in the audience's resistance might be what they read, what they choose not to read, but also I would say self-care. And I think that also gets to Beryl's point is like, we really need to talk about that and health in the truly inclusive word. Sometimes that resistance could be you just taking moments for yourself because we need y'all, right? We need to be here. We need people continuing those fights because if we lose those people who are advocating, right, then what does that do for future generations?
Yes.
Thank you both so much for that. It really speaks to the whole issue that ideas are complicated, complex, multi-layered, and unfortunately we have I guess it's this mass communications idea that it has to be short, sweet, and not more than 15 characters or else people will lose their attention, when the reality is that people lose attention only when something lacks interest and when it's too simplistic. So thank you all so much for that very important and complicated answer to what seemed to be a very simple question. The next question is to both of you as well. As educators, how should we frame Black resistance? And Holly, I'm going to kick that over to you.
Okay.
Because you are really in the weeds with so many students.
Right.
And I say in the weeds because, students are interesting. I'm long in the tooth. And as a faculty member, they're often scared of me because, gray hair really reflects something different and important.
I've got a few, so.
It's intimidating too.
Right.
But you're more approachable with your students. So that's why I want to start with you first.
Thank you. I think if I really had to like whittle it down, at first it actually comes back to just like how I was raised. And as I was saying to everyone, being raised in Virginia Beach, like you have no idea how grateful I am to be participating in this. Like I'm going to be bragging to my mom as soon as this is over. But I think even when I was a child, right, like my relatives were having me read Frederick Douglass and Malcolm X's autobiography when I was 8 and 9 years old. And I do not I'll be honest, I was still like, what is half of the things I'm reading? But for me, it was, they wanted me to know the history that wasn't being taught in schools necessarily. And I realized for me, when I was the student, I really struggled with how it was being taught to me. Right, like we talk about Dr. King Jr., we talk about Rosa, but like Malcolm, Medgar Evers even never got any attention. And that always made me really, or the many allies that helped them. And so for me, it was trying, as a student, was really trying to be more inclusive and in the truest sense of that word and be more accurate. And so as an educator, I really try to bring that to the forefront is one that, it's a privilege to do what I do. It's difficult, don't get me wrong, but like I'm always learning and I learn from my students. And for me, it's like I try to frame how I teach it to them is whether we're talking Black history, African American history, women's history, is that how you can use this information to understand that you, student, matter, right? And I'm not even saying like Black student, I'm saying student in general, that
Mhm.
you have a voice and that we can look at, in my African American history course, modern one recently, I really emphasized how children were the key leaders in the modern civil rights movement. And that was for a lot of my students, they struggled with that because they were like, well, Dr. King, I was like, yeah, but what about Project C? Like even he understood that we need children on the front line. Children were doing, sit-ins, children were like literally putting themselves into these difficult situations and things that we, myself included, take for granted every second of every day right now. And I say that to say at the end of the semester, students wrote into their evals that they don't need to wait for adults anymore to like be inspired, that they've seen historically how children have led the way in many ways. And so like for them to see that and to then organize demonstrations on my campus using the content, truthfully, that's what gets me emotional is that these students are saying, I have a voice, I matter, and I'm going to use my voice to advocate not just for myself, but for the next generation. But I'll also just close with this is like, I've been inspired to really let the students lead the charge at my campus. So after reading Roots and watching the classic miniseries, I had them do an oral history project where I said, trace your family's history, go back 3 generations. And I want to know where you come from. And you're the end of the story. The short version is one of the students found out that her grandmother was acknowledged by the national branch of the national chapter of the NAACP in the 1960s for advocating for migrant farmers. Her uncle was part of one of the first sit-ins in modern history in Greenville. And the fact that she said her grandmother was crying because she said she thought nobody cared about her story. And those projects were so good that they are now in the university's library forever. So I asked them, I said, how emotional is that 50 years from now, where you're listening to a lecture with 500 people and it's your family? And it's not because anything I did, it's you. So I think it's framing how we can use Black resistance right now. Even if we're using historical figures hundreds of years ago, you have a voice too.
Thank you so much. You reminded me of the value of making sure that these kinds of interviews are in the public view. We
Yes.
have a woman who, she wasn't from Norfolk, she was actually from Auburn, New York. Vivian Carter Mason, who's the 3rd president of the National Council of Negro Women, and someone from Old Dominion University interviewed her because she died at the age of 82 here in Norfolk. And she mentioned in a cookbook that the National Council of Negro Women put out as a fundraiser that one of the recipes that she contributed to that cookbook was given to her by Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman and her family were part of the same church. She grew up knowing Harriet Tubman, and she said, Harriet Tubman taught her how to make cornbread while regaling them with hair-raising tales of her escapes. And I thought, oh my God, why couldn't someone follow up in these interviews with that? But because that information about the National Council was not lost, but many people didn't pay any attention by the late 70s and so forth, that information was not known. And so when you start putting together things while the people are alive, you can follow up. So Beryl, as
Yes.
educators, how should we frame Black resistance?
So there are many things on my mind, and thank you, Holly, for recanting and sharing. I mean, I guess as we're bouncing off of each other. Okay, so first of all, I want to go back to the concept of wellness. Self-care is so important. I used to be one of those students who would go all the time. and feel like I couldn't rest. And when I met Rosa, actually I first met Rosa Parks when I was at Hampton University. She came for an event, and that was before I worked with her full time. And there's a historic tree at Hampton called Emancipation Oak, where the first classes were held. And that's where I had a chance to sit and speak with her. I had in college a professor who happened to be African American, who taught a class called Oral History and Social Science Methodology, which changed my life because she did the same thing that Holly was talking about. She had each of us, well, she didn't restrict our genealogy to 3 generations. She said, if any elders are alive, go talk to them now while they're here on the planet. And I did that, and I recorded it. Take your tape recorder, take your mic. And I always remembered that, one, because that's history that not just my family will have, but I took that so that I incorporated that into classes that I taught as well, to tell them some of your primary sources are the people right there in your family, and they've done things that you probably don't even know about. And even at where I am in my station in life, there are things I've done that my children don't know about. And as I'm listening, it's like, okay, I need to talk more about those. Some of them I've written down. And as Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander, I got to get that straight because I call her by her nickname. As I listen to her and sit often in awe, it's like, how do you do all this? So each of us has our own way in which we make a difference as educators. So educator in the classroom, but it's also educator in the community. It's educator in the media, educator in being a leader yourself and pioneering and moving along the way. But you did ask me about the classroom. So let me also say that part of that wellness I learned about, I started talking about Rosa Parks, because Rosa Parks even took a hiatus and went to Highlander in Tennessee to take a break. And it was when after she took that break and Emmett Till was killed that summer, and she came back, this is 1955, and she came back home, and that December 1st is when she didn't give up her seat because she had all these things to think about. She had taken a break, had been refreshed, etc., and was able to move forward. And I just think, yeah, she needed to be refreshed because come December 5th, 1955 was when the boycott started and lasted for 381 days. So with that tenacity and teaching your students through, or your audience through those examples, and sometimes I pinch myself, it's like, I had the chance to be with somebody like that. But then in my own family, who marched from Selma to Montgomery, who was at the March on Washington, who did different things, I take those stories that my family members tell me, and I move that forward. But to let the students know, and to underscore something else that was said, the time is now. You don't have to wait for permission. You are the leader, young people. You are leading the path to make a difference, as we see some of these organized groups that exist today. Black Lives Matter, for an example. I mean, they're all types of groups. And as they are seeing their ability to be empowered, and they also are making a change, each one teach one. Each one, it unconsciously gives the other students permission to do the same, to go out there and say, I can make a difference too. From the organizations to something as basic as registering and going out and voting. As in certain places where voting is being suppressed, to go out there and go pick people up and take them to the polls and bring them food in line and all kind of things where you can't get water, can't get out of line, whatever, to help move humanity forward. And I am so proud of these young people. It's like they're old souls knowing what to do. And I'm happy that we as educators and we as adults can say to them, you don't need mommy's permission. You don't need daddy's permission. You don't need the college president's permission. You don't need whoever's permission. Go out there and do it. And you see more young people also running for office because they know they have something to say and they have this strong sense of confidence. And I'm just happy to see that movement forward. So I think I've talked about all the, let me see, it's important to have strength. I said that. And to push back on the negative and celebrate the positive. And that's what these young people are doing.
Can I add, Beryl, because she just got me so hyped listening to what she said. Like, I think, I mean, I want to echo a lot, everything she said, but especially, I think it's also important for those in the education, like the educating space, to understand we learn from our students, right? Our
Yes.
students, and I wrote that into my book, like this book could never have been done without collaboration with my students at every institution I've ever been at. And the day I don't value what my students bring in terms of just like their life and knowledge and hunger, I'm quitting my job, because like they inspire me.
Yes.
And Beryl's point, like 100%, because I asked one of my students about like, when's the last time y'all have gone to like your like local school board in terms of like, if you want to talk about education, go see what's being debated in schools, even if you never had a kid, because you will walk away going, holy blank. And one of the students went to the meeting and was like, yep, yeah, I learned a lot. And because of that, right. And they came back to class and everyone had this conversation. So I think we as adults need to always recognize Terrell's point that like the youth want to have these conversations. We're scared usually, and that they always inspire us. It's just, we need to take note of their agency, activism. You know, kids as young as 5 years old willing to pledge to make a fundamental difference to our global society. And yet, you know, I think of me at 5 years old, I was just trying to get a Huffy to ride, you know, on a bike trail.
Yeah, and let me say also, as you're talking, that I can hear the elders in my family saying that it was the young people, meaning like the college level back in that time period, the college people who were sitting at the lunch counters in Greensboro. The college students have more time and don't have to get up and go to work. And they're also not afraid of losing their jobs. I remember my family saying when they marched into Montgomery that there were people on either side, like they're walking down the middle or marching down the middle, and there are people on other side, there are people on roofs, etc. And there are people like clapping for them. But some of them were also, didn't participate because they were afraid that they would lose their jobs. And they had responsibilities. So they were so moved at the fact that people came from all over. And even I recently met the youngest person. She was 15. She came to my city and talked about her experience as a 15-year-old and being involved in the Selma to Montgomery march, to the point of young people. In addition, I'm thinking about Birmingham and the dogs and having visited there, or the children in the church diagonally across the street who were bombed. There were 5. Generally, the history books only talk about 4. The 5th one was one of the sisters that was killed. And I mean, not that they were looking to be heroes or heroines, but they were part of the trauma that caused the movement to move forward. And despite their deaths, I mean, people unfortunately have to die sometimes for people to wake up to make a difference. But even the television cameras there also made a difference, so that people would realize when they're watching TV at dinner time, oh, this is for real. And it had ramifications. There's a whole bunch of, like, even at my child's school, as a result, the trustees voted to admit Black people. Before that, it was, not just at our school, at other places. It's the reality. It becomes a reality when you either see it up close in person or you see it on, back then it was just TV. Now it's YouTube and what have you. But when it becomes real, that invigorates people to make a difference and say, let me get off my sofa. Let me do what I need to do because I need to do something. This is not right. Or let me try to make it right. And I just see these young people getting more involved in inspiring and invigorating people to make a difference.
So, what I'm hearing from both of you is the issue that educators have tremendous power. They can inspire their students not only to know our real past, inspire them to learn more, but also inspire them to understand that they have power as well and to use that power. I call it, I tell my students, use your outside voice. Because, you know, if you understand the power of your voice, then you understand how important it is to prevent people from silencing your voice. And so what I hear from both of you is that educators have that particular power. Holly, I want to direct this question to you. How do you teach Black resistance in the classroom? And let me frame it this way in particular. You know, there are a lot of teachers who are afraid they're going to anger people, they're going to offend people, they're going to get backlash if they actually teach any Black history, that may make white people feel uncomfortable. And so, how do we teach, or how should we teach Black resistance in the classroom?
That's a great question that I was just asked by a contingent of Florida secondary school teachers, where I have the privilege of just presenting. I'm not gonna lie, like I don't know, and I don't want to claim that I have the answers, because everyone's experiences and each teacher, you know, what they bring into that room and outside of the room, right? Because we're teaching when you're walking to and from class, you're teaching when you're in the parking lot, you're teaching, and so it's never limited. As I've learned, some of my students are following me around campus, asking me 1,000 questions, and I'm like, okay, I guess we're still talking about class right now. I I think for me, and it's partly because of being a military brat, having lived in 30 different places across the world, I know people are people. They're great people. They're crappy people, right? And I think that I bring that part into how I choose to talk about different groups of people, but then also I let the records speak for themselves. I mean, if you want me to be as honest as I can. So whether we're talking about the Confederacy, whether we're talking about the Klan, whether we're talking about the Black people, like any groups, right? Or any people, like I'm like, when's the last, have you read this document, right? The United States Constitution. Most students will bring it in. And my first question is, have you ever read it? And they'll say, well, maybe, you know, depending on where they went, like they had to read it as part of a state mandate, right? But they don't know it. And I'm like, but how can you pledge all these things if you don't even know what it says, more importantly, what it's not saying, especially as we're talking about Black history, women's history, like these different groups who have been excluded from jump, right? So it's like, and what I've noticed is a lot of students' frustration, because this is usually what's being said to me. And I recognize because I'm working in higher ed, they go, why is this the first time I'm ever hearing this? Right. And so the first is that, like, you know, if I had to put stages to it, is the students' anger, right? That why did I have to come here? And I agree with them, because I also think I'm angry at the sense that so many people are not getting exposed to this, right? Like maybe they don't have the resources, time, or don't just want to go to higher ed, and that's okay. Then the next is like their decisions on what can we do to make this information more well known. And I will say, and I'm not someone on social media anymore, but like, you know, students using things like TikTok, for example, to bring like what they're learning into social media. Like I've seen some of that and it's awesome. And I'm actually starting to create classroom assignments that encourage them to do that, but also to protect themselves in terms of self-care, knowing you could open yourself up to potential backlash or whatever. Truthfully, because I teach Civil War history, Reconstruction, usually I get asked questions about, well, how do you teach these controversial or sensitive topics? And I say, I don't hold anything back. I just, here's the information, right? So for instance, having the students read the KKK's Constitution in 1866, in which they make it explicitly clear everything they do is for the honor and legacy of the Confederacy, right? And I say, all right, if you're gonna hitch your wagon to that, then you hitch your wagon to everything that goes with that. And most students, as soon as they read that Constitution, is what? Or for them, it's usually the frustration when we talk now about CRT, all of that. And I don't get into that, just like I don't get into the monument discussion, because that's not, to me, it's not my passion. But I say, I'm not surprised. Historically, if we were to look at the Women's Ku Klux Klan in Indiana, they were doing this from jump, excluding not just Black people, but even Jewish people, immigrant, right? Like you name it, atheists, Catholic. And so to see to give the students the information and the tool belts, if you will, to know that they can have these conversations respectfully, you know, in ways with other people. Because when I'm talking even people on the street, like, I know I could just sit there and wax, I know this maybe more than you, but that's not a constructive conversation. For me, it's like, okay, well, here we go. Let's talk about this. Why do you think that? And what I've experienced most times is that people are appreciative, right? When we talk about monuments, someone asked me that when George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many others lost their lives in that whole debate. And I said, you know, just to be clear, most of the monuments that were created were done in the 1920s and 30s, long after the Civil War had officially ended. Number one, so those were visible demonstrations of white supremacy. But what we don't talk about is those descendants who are the living monuments, right? Like having had the privilege of presenting my work in Pennsylvania, but also in Natchez, Mississippi, as I've learned apparently, and this is with work of their local politicians, that they speculate over 70% of the Black people that live in Natchez right now are the direct descendants of Civil War soldiers. Which I'm like, how is it, like, I'm angry that that's not known outside of Natchez. Because so for me, it's like, I bet there's people in this audience, right, that may have some tie or know someone who has a tie. So it's just like bringing those kinds of conversations to the forefront, right, is that the resistance takes on different forms. If we teach with the perception of this is going to upset someone, well then, I mean, yes, like you can't teach in fear, but I want to be clear. I say that knowing I work at a private school, right, where I don't have to worry about Lindsey Graham coming after me, right? If I was working at where I went, University of Central Florida, yeah, I got to be honest, I would be very fearful for my job. And that's sad because I never, ever thought what we do, what we're doing right now is controversial. Empowering people to know that they have a voice and that you are an agent of change is controversial. And so like it hurts to know that there are people who think that way because, and I just say this, yeah, I teach Black history and I teach women's history, but if my goal is for someone who's not Black to know, like, I can see why Black history is very important and is American history, to be clear, right? And that it's women's history is American, right? So it's just trying to get them to navigate this, but I'm gonna be clear, like next week, even by the time we get off of this call, maybe some new policy comes out where changes the conversation. I would just say, and this gets back to Beryl's point, particularly those who are in spaces where you are beholden to governmental insight or oversight, protect yourself, right? Like protect yourself in every sense of that word, because we don't want to lose educators, period. Like that's, even when I was a kid, there was always a crisis about lack of educators and we don't pay educators enough. That's a whole nother conversation, right? But like, we don't need to lose people who are passionate about instilling agency and uplifting students.
You so much. In fact, you brought up a really important point, and that is that as we have many societies engaged in book banning and restricting freedom of speech at the same time arguing for freedom of speech. Educators are on the front lines, and I think that historically, educators have been valued. It's when you have a mass consumer society that educators are a threat because they get people to think. And the last thing someone who wants to sell you a product wants you to do is think about it. They want you to act on impulses. And so being educators is an important and thoughtful process. And with that, I want this to actually go to both of you, but I'm going to start with Beryl. How has Black resistance really been a part of the community? And you can take it in different directions, whether you think a community specifically of Black people or the broader community.
Before I go there, I also was thinking regarding education, the literacy laws, and how teaching the enslaved how to read and write, just to educate them, became a major issue, and then therefore those laws came into play because education is power, as you said, Dr. Cassandra Newby Alexander, and it is just a major fear. And so some people had to do it behind the scenes or quietly or at night, but don't be caught because there'd be grave consequences. So this goes, as you know, everybody knows on the panel that this goes back very far, not just currently. So let me use that as a segue to talk about community. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking about it as the very beginning, as it spoke to not just people of color, but the whole issue of the slave trade, where people who were in holding pens or in castles or dungeons, when it was their time to get on their ship to come across the waters, that some people's resistance was, I'm not doing this. I might do it for a little while, but when I come out of the hull, and it's time for me to be fed or whatever happens when you come up to the deck, I'm going to jump overboard. And so my resistance is, I'm not a part of this. Goodbye. I'm checking out. And sometimes, because you were chained to other people, you took other people with you, unless the people on the ship reeled you back in. Also, going back to one's mindset, I've thought about, and I can't even imagine what it's like to get your mindset ready for a 3-month or more journey and be connected to somebody. And not to be real explicit, but it's not like you could get up and go to the bathroom. You were with someone and you were just connected to them for weeks and months at a time. And to be able to have your head wrapped around the fact that I'm going to survive this, and then look generations later and say, we are the strongest of the, we are the strongest of the strong because we are the survivors. And that's our resistance, to be the survivors and to have made it through that middle passage. And then once the enslaved got here, the rebellions. And the rebellions took many forms, something passive like sabotaging crops, arson, taking things, running away. The Underground Rail, well, that's Underground Railroad, that's not passive, but being involved with the Underground Railroad, being a passenger or conductor like Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, or something less obvious like working slowly, faking illnesses, misplacing tools and equipment, doing what you needed to do, sometimes to get a reprieve because you too were tired or you were sick and tired and didn't want to do it anymore, or at least needed a break. So that's part of the resistance. And also in the resistance, there were allies, and the allies helped with the process in many ways. One of the most visible was the Underground Railroad. And they helped with the Black resistance in many, many ways, from hiding people to getting people from station to station, to teaching them what the symbols were on quilts, or there's a place in Ohio called Ripley, Ohio, which is right across from the Ohio River. And if it was there's one candle in the window, it meant one thing. If it was 2 candles or lanterns, it meant something else. So you would get a message to know whether or not you should cross the Ohio River. And of course, the enslaved did not know how to swim, and that was done on purpose, so you wouldn't run away or swim away. But your resistance was, doesn't matter, I can't swim, I'm out of here, and I'm going to trust on this Underground Railroad, and I'm going to get across the water. And what makes me really go, is the people who crossed in the winter and you didn't know if the ice was going to break, but you took that chance to get to the other side. Moving forward in time is even negotiating. Let me use Ohio again as an example. Negotiating to get through Ohio because there were bounty hunters, people who were trying to send you back and find you. and sometimes being separated from the group and still having, for whatever reason, and still having to move forward and move on, but having that sense of self and sense of strength to move forward because you had the fortitude and determination that you were going to be free regardless. Also, today, protest, lobbying, speeches, the print press, I'm thinking like the North Star newspaper, I mean, all kinds of publications, and people who became advocates locally, nationally, from Rosa Parks to Martin Luther King, the boycott, the everyday person who for 381 days said, I'm not going to take the bus, I'm going to walk to work. And then having the allies in Birmingham, Alabama, who did the same to support Montgomery and other places in the country, so that they became a major force in bringing attention to the fact that the intent of the boycott was serious, and the intent of the boycott was to make a major difference. We're even going to take a case all the way to the Supreme Court. More on that later when you ask me the next question related to that. And so people were voting, mobilizing, and I can't forget, as a musician, music. Music was a resistance. Music kept your soul lifted. Music also was a way of communicating in secret or in code so that people wouldn't know what you were talking about. Like steal away through the night. So that was a message that we're leaving tonight on the Underground Railroad, and we are leaving and we are heading north. And other songs that gave a message of what was going on. So it lifted your spirits if it was one for joy and excitement and to help you get through the day, but it also was coded with different things so that people knew what to do. And let me end with faith and religion. The faith and religion, you know, whether or not you believed in it, but at least you had something to invigorate your soul. I'm going to make it through this, and I'm going to make it through this day, and I'm going to make it through this week. And I just experienced a catastrophe, or I just saw a lynching, or I just was reprimanded, or they tried to whip me into shape, but I'm going to keep going on. I'm going to keep doing what I need to do because I am here and my very existence is resistant. My very being. And even for today, our presence here is resistant. Just think about the thousands of babies that are killed from infant immortality, and the mothers as well, and the fathers who are stung by the fact that they just lost their family. That's all. Thank you.
I'd like to add just a quick to follow up on that too, is like, I would say it's the foundation. Without question. And I also want to say the resistance, and I'm speaking one from lived experience, but also as a historian, we don't put enough respect on Black women as the key leaders in the resistance. And to be more honest, just women in general, for being fundamentally very important in terms of leading the ways, access to education, whether we're talking about Sarah Mapps Douglas, who was a woman in Philadelphia, Black woman in Philadelphia, who actually was an educator, became the Institute for Colored Youth. And she was a very important individual. Julia Garnett, who during the Civil War was prominently involved in women's rights, but also for supporting Black soldiers when the United States was failing to do so in New York State. But I would also say in terms of education, which is very important for many of the reasons echoed, but just and not to simplify it, but the actions of going to and from school was resistance, historically, particularly for Black children. If we're talking the 19th century with the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which legalizes essentially any Black person, not even just African Americans in the United States or its territories, could be put into enslavement with what was called blackbirding. In Philadelphia, for example, in New York City, it was Black children who are often the targets of that. And I do want to acknowledge Dr. Hillary Green at Davidson College. She's got a book, actually, she's working on where she is highlighting her family's history in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, and how those children were stolen into slavery. And they are still fighting right now to recover where is our families, right? And so it was Black women, going back to the Fugitive Slave Act, that were the ones protecting those children to and from school. we don't put enough respect on how important women are to global history. But truthfully, and I say this, that is my mission, because I'm so tired of us focusing on the men in uniform, for example, when we talk about the Civil War, and we lose sight of those mothers, daughters who are putting their lives on the line in public transit to get there. Because unfortunately in Philadelphia, there are records of Black women, some who are pregnant, being literally thrown off of public transit in the cold as they are trying to go support Black men to serve in the Civil War. So Black women are fighting to go help their men fight literally, right? So it's like, we don't talk enough about that. But I'd also close with, the resistance isn't always glamorous. And this gets back to Beryl's point, is like, we wanna, myself included when I was younger, we wanna talk about those marching, those in uniform, those overseas. We don't talk about those who resist by not enlisting, by not marching, by not going to the, because there are different reasons and realities that make it to where they can't, including their lives are literally on the line.
On the line, yes.
And I'll close with this, because this is where it gets uncomfortable for my students. I say, let me give you a scenario. It's, let's say, the 1940s. You're a Black person living in the deep south of Florida. You have two options if you're a Black man. You can go vote, or a Black person, you can go vote. But if you leave your house, you are being told that your home will not be there and anyone inside will not be alive if you leave to go vote. Or you can stay home and not vote, knowing that you not voting will lead to a candidate who is openly hostile and racist to getting the election. Which do you choose? And the short version is the students get angry and basically like, no matter what I choose, like, I feel like I'm gonna lose. And like, now you understand these people's realities. So stop glamorizing one section of people and realize that this was a hard choice for everyone involved. Even children who may not have had a concept of voting, their lives are on the line. And to Beryl's point, literally, particularly any Black person or person of color being born and living through these moments is in a race war that they didn't even know existed, but they will as they continue to live in this country.
And I'd like to follow up. I know I said that I was closing, but as I turned my page, I saw the supporting of the community also includes professional organizations, colleges and universities, even sometimes primary and secondary schools, political groups, civic and social organizations, political organizations, sororities and fraternities, churches, banks, insurance companies, and media, so that we would have our own organizations, one when we could not integrate, but even now, like with colleges and universities, there's a resurgence and an increase of the number of applicants at the many HBCUs for many reasons. And maybe I should defer to Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander, who is in a HBCU, but I just know that some of the universities are building more buildings, more dormitories to accommodate the fact that there is this surge of applications and surge of students wanting to be in that kind of environment, and think it's important, and it is important, to experience a cultural difference from going to a predominantly white high school, or whatever your other experience was. So with that, these organizations stress determination, freedom, and equal protection in general, and equal protection under the law.
Well,
So-
you know, I'm going to be mindful of our time. I know we're getting close to the end, and we have 3 more questions. So I'm going to ask our panelists if you can just zero in for maybe 2 minutes at most on our last 3 questions. This next one is for Beryl specifically. How has Black resistance been taught in the law?
Okay.
That's a broad question. So
Yeah,
if you could just kind of frame it in general, which you see a lot of law schools doing, but then, you know, what's maybe happening now?
Okay, I will talk in general, because when I was in law school, there weren't classes like that in my law school. Um, and where I learned more information was from Judge Higginbotham. Let me back up. In college, there was a class that I took where a professor, Derek Bell, who taught at Harvard, had a case book, and our class used that book. But it was more college friendly. In law school, I did not have that experience. I'm grateful to Judge Higginbotham. Yes, In a Matter of Color is a book that I purchased, and then when I taught through the Carter G. Woodson Institute at UVA, and then subsequently at the in the history department, I also taught classes, and I learned a lot. And then when I went to Philadelphia to work with him, where he sat as a judge, learned even more. So the short answer is, then there was not a lot. Now there are more, and one learns through cases, ordinances, statutes, and what those teach you is what the law is. And then as a student, you're asked, are they right? And could it be something different? So even though it was written by a judge, is that judge right, using the Socratic method? And so it teaches you to think in a way where you're challenging authority, the judge, or the trier of fact, but generally these are cases by the Supreme Court, so justices or judges. So you are taught what is, and then think about what it could be if you are disagreeing. So that mindset and that ability to analyze then helps you when you go out, if you're practicing law, and dealing with issues of resistance, whether it be in the context we're talking about or anything else. You have that legal way of thinking in the Socratic method of going about doing things. More broadly, I thought about also in the community, the law in the street or the law in the family, like how families, African-American families teach their children through what's called the talk, how to deal with police. And if they're stopped by a police person, what to do. I won't go through what those things are. So the talk, the police pulls you over. I will say you put your hands on the steering wheel and do not take them off, and be polite. And there's more to that. Also avoiding certain neighborhoods. Don't go in a neighborhood where people don't know you. You know cases, and we know cases, they've been on the news. I won't go into detail about those, where people who are of color were not in their neighborhood and things happened to them. Oftentimes they were killed or beat up. So that's another thing. Also, when your parents tell you, and this is not just for African-American children, but all children, but since we're talking about resistance from African-American children, to make sure you're home when those street lights are on. Why? Because you don't know what's going to happen, and things happen at night. And I, as a parent, need to know where you are. So please come home and be home when the street lights come on. And you are taught the importance of consequences, because you don't always know, not just regarding street lights, but just in general. When you're in a group or a community, and you, particularly if you're the only one or one of a few, you want to make sure that you are looked out for, because there are challenges in the society today, even today, and you could be singled out, and you can't always do what other people are doing. So be mindful of that and know that there are consequences. So follow through on that. And lastly, and I guess I'm going back in time, and I'm sorry I'm out of order with the chronology, but also not necessarily something on the books, but you learn the policy of the law, the way of doing things when you were on a plantation or in a society and you had to watch the punishment of other people, whether it be a whipping, a beating, a lynching, what have you. Those are not laws on the book, but those are policies and codes in which people had to learn vicariously that there were certain things they were supposed to do and not do.
Thank you so much. You know, I'm reminded that you all have actually given us so much rich information with the way that you have looked at all of these questions, that you've actually addressed this next one. What forms has Black resistance taken in the way educators teach? What I would like for you to do is to choose one way each. And I'm going to start with you, Holly. One way each that Black resistance, how educators have taken one of these forms to teach Black resistance.
I'll make mine quick because it's fresh in my head. So teaching music. So for me, when I was teaching about the Cotton Club and that whole experience there, what I flipped is talking about the sugarcane, right? So that Black club that was operating at that same time, and getting back to Beryl's point, how the musical forms were ways to express themselves, right? So including maybe playing the same, like a Duke Ellington song one way for the Cotton Club, and which is more somber, and then maybe Duke playing a completely different, more upbeat, more lively, for example, at the sugarcane. So just music is really important for so many reasons, including forms of expression, coded messages, but also at minimum to just inform people in different ways, right? Not just a traditional lecture.
Thank you. Beryl.
Can you repeat the question?
So this question asks, what forms has Black resistance taken in the way educators teach, whether it's in history, sociology, literature? So pick one of those and give us an example. And you could just reiterate. And if you could, just give it to us really quickly, since we are almost out of time.
I think that seeing is believing and helps to reinforce learning styles. It's students, we all learn in different ways. It might be a mix of ways. So one thing I like to do is take my students on field trips. So when I taught at University of Virginia, I took my students to the Supreme Court of the United States. I knew some of the people who were clerking there then for the justices. I wanted them to walk up those steps to the Supreme Court, to feel it, to touch the columns. We took a picture. And that they could, the justices weren't seated, but they could go into the chamber, kind of peek into the chamber and see what was what. So I think that if you can give your students opportunity to take a field trip, or at very least have some kind of visual, that adds to the abstractness of lecture, because it makes it more real. And from a neuroscience perspective, the neurotransmitters, you talked about music, we do this in music, it goes down more than one pathway in the brain. And so that gives them another way to process and remember what it is you're teaching them.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to give you actually a really hard challenge with this last question. In 2 sentences, what is the most important thing you want people to understand about Black resistance, and how it is seen in our education and in our larger community, or how it can be seen in education and in our larger community? 2 sentences. Big challenge.
Sure. Even those who may be on the surface a victim are always fighting, are always resisting. Period.
Beryl.
And mine is that you are the resistance. You are the resistance. Your very existence is the resistance. And my second comment is, you are the change. You are the change, as Gandhi says, they'll make a difference in the world. That was a paraphrase, but you are the change, and to realize your power to be that change.
I want to thank both of you, Dr. Holly Pinheiro and the Honorable Beryl D. Anderson, for this incredible conversation that you all have given us today. There is a question that I see, and Stephanie, you can add to it if I've missed any of the questions, but one person said, what's the best way to keep in touch with Dr. Pinheiro and the Honorable Beryl Anderson's work. And so perhaps either of you can tell us what's the best way.
Mine is simple. I have a website. Basically my name, drhollypinheirojr.com. I update it very regularly, including all interviews and links to different things. So yeah, that would be the catch-all, or at minimum, just Furman University's website as well, I would probably say.
Beryl.
I'm going to ask you a question. Do you all have a vehicle through which people can go through you?
Yes. In fact, we have not only the YouTube channel, but we also have certain things that we can post. And I know Dr. Richmond and I have been talking about ways that we can make the website a lot more robust than the currently constricts us to. But we're hopeful that we can begin very soon to really have these bigger conversations out there. Stephanie, you want to add to this?
Yes, so you can follow the Joseph Jenkins Roberts Center on YouTube. Everybody who registered for this panel will get an email this afternoon or tomorrow, whenever the video is finished processing and upload, with the link to watch it live, and also the link to our whole YouTube channel. I recently started a Instagram account for our other major research endeavor through the Joseph Jenkins Roberts Center, the Soul Down River Project. And so I often cross post things like this event and, other things that come across my email in there, as well as kind of snippets from that research project, where we are investigating the domestic slave trade from Norfolk to New Orleans, and the more than 20,000 individuals' life stories that we're trying to find in these records. And so, be forewarned that that Instagram account kind of needs a trigger warning, because it is heavy. But I do try and put, strange things that I come across in there as well. If there's other interesting stuff we found, pirates trading slaves, and but I try and grab emancipation, recordings of emancipations, and discussions about free people of color purchasing enslaved people in New Orleans. So we have two more questions. We have, how can those of us who are not Black engage with and assist in Black resistance? And then, yes, and the other one in our chat is about allies, and particularly training or helping to raise children who will become allies.
I'll make mine. Oh, Beryl, do you want to
go? No, go ahead. I have a few thoughts, but I'm putting my thoughts together.
So I think part of it is the short version is just being informed, and I'm not even saying it like the college level, just like knowing what's going on in your global society. Self-care is definitely needed when consuming the news. I want to be clear, like, don't just watch the news and that's everything, because it'll overwhelm you. But just continue to read. Go into your local library. I say this as someone who is a gender historian who does women's history, knowing full well I don't know everything about what it means to be a woman on a day-to-day basis, but I use that knowledge and lived experiences to advocate for others. And I mean, as simple as, and this is going to sound simple, as like sometimes like the way in which allyship can take different forms, but letting people know they're not alone, right? And I'm just being honest, and this is not even just about Black people in general. Like, when sometimes people just need to be seen, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes, as simple as this is, and I do this with my students, knowing full well, as soon as I ask this question, I have opened up Pandora's box. And every time I get someone that says something that I'm like, whoa, is how are you doing? And usually I have to say, like, no, for real, not the corny, okay, like, how are you? And then when I say how I'm really doing with people, then I usually get some truthful answers. And sometimes letting people know you see and hear them and you're with them, I'm not gonna say that's like the perfect end, but it's a start. right? Like it's a start. But you don't have to, in my opinion, you don't necessarily have to be the person out there in the streets every, second. Like sometimes the best allies, in my opinion, are those who are doing the work from behind the scenes.
Mhm.
It's like they don't want the glory necessarily, but they're there with you, and they will always be there with you.
I would add to that, not much, but making sure that your awareness comes from reading, if there are two sides, both sides, or multiple sides. And then also there are, in addition to books in the library, there are lectures. And those lecture series, are, the ones at least where I live, are free. Also, if you live near a university, the universities have lecture series and have different departments, some of which might deal with the issues that we've talked about today. There are podcasts. If you're in the education mode, I mean, the mode of wanting to know, wanting to learn, there are many ways to do that. And particularly with social media and media right now, I guess I'm just emphasizing to be discerning and to not just get one side of the information. And then finally, when you go to these lectures, I guess it's on the same point as Holly, to let the person know who you are, and maybe there's something that they've talked about or alluded to, or a project that they're working on that might be helpful for you to be a part of. And you might be a part of it by being in front and back, on the side. And I definitely underscore and agree. Sometimes it's important to, not sometimes, all the time, it can be important to know there are people with you, because it's very lonely and alone, and to be in a space, and particularly now with, even though we're not in the pandemic, there's still concerns about health issues. And so sometimes you're doing a lot of your work by yourself and you're insulated. And so to break that insulation, to know that there's somebody who will send you a kind message or follow through, and so much is done on the computer, etc. So to personalize it. And I think that that's very important in a world in which we need people to be the change and to be the support.
Thank you so much. And with that, I thank all of you for participating in this incredible conversation. And I am going to hand the baton to Hillary Plate.
Thank you so much. I know you might have seen me looking down every once in a while. I think I have like 50 pages of notes from this conversation. What a rich discussion. I feel absolutely privileged to have been able to witness and listen to everything that you've added. I've written down all the books. I'm going to be looking for yours, Dr. Pinheiro. I know, Judge Anderson, there's got to be one coming out of you sometime soon too, right? But
absolutely, I got my family on my case. You've written this, or this article, let's turn it into a book.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I really heard you about when you mentioned about HBCUs, because in getting to know Dr. Richmond and Dr. Newby Alexander, I have been more interested in the fact that it's really, it is significant to me that being able to see and hear and learn about all sides of history, or all sides of law, or all things that we're dealing with in a society right now, some of the very, very best places who are doing that work daily are HBCUs. And where are the rest of our educational members of community making sure that that's possible? It makes me, I've told Dr. Newby Alexander this many times, I want to go to NSU, I want to be their student, but it was all very inspiring. So without going too far down my rabbit hole of praise for all of you, I do want to thank Dr. Newby Alexander and Dr. Richmond and Miss Devlin Adams over at Norfolk State for being our amazing partners and for bringing the two of you into this discussion. I want to thank Emily LeBeau's and Beth Hundley over our supervisors at the Department of Cultural Affairs, who are standing strong behind doing these programs, not just during Black History Month, but all year long for the last 3 years. Mr. Alex Dye, who has tirelessly worked with Stevelin to make sure we get these out, especially after the recordings. Those of you that are on and watching us wrap up, these recordings are available through NSU's YouTube channel for the Joseph Jenkins Roberts Centers. And so sometimes we see a lot of viewership after the fact. So please, please, please watch them and share them out. I want to thank Dr. Amelia Ross Hammond and Tamar Smithers over at the Virginia African American Cultural Center for helping with research and participating with us and their partnership with our fellow partners, and the Princess Anne County Training School, Union Kempsville High School Alumni Association. Those of you who participated in our oral history gatherings and those of you who continue to support these panel discussions are absolutely irreplaceable. You are living history in our midst and you help us learn every day. So thank you for that. Please save the dates for our next panels. Black Resistance Law and the Press is in September. I know that one is going to be really interesting, and I'm very excited to see the panelists that come up. Stay tuned during the summer when we announce who will be on the panel. In December, it's going to be one of my favorites, arts and culture, with a background in world music and having learned from some really amazing jazz musicians, and even sat in on some discussions with Mavis Staples. Understanding the power of resistance through music is just phenomenal. I think that's going to be a really great discussion, and it will actually lead us into next year's theme, which has been announced that next year's Black History theme will be arts and entertainment. Juneteenth events, if you want to get further involved, if you want to meet some of the people that participated in today's panel or participated in the oral history gatherings, if you just want to come out and stand shoulder to shoulder with people who want to learn more about Juneteenth, want to celebrate the depth of its meaning, and just have fellowship with others, please come join us for VB Gigs. We're partnering with the Virginia African American Cultural Center to celebrate Juneteenth and kick off the weekend Saturday from 9 to noon with 3 wonderful solo performers and the incredible assistance of just the Vibe District and all of the folks down there. Then on Sunday, we are going to be at the Princess Anne County Training School, Union Kempsville High School Museum, located at Renaissance Academy. There is a concert with the Fuzz Band, who are just amazing, amazing musicians, steeped in history. They are themselves ethnomusicologists. They're going to be exploring the history of African American influence on pop and funk music. So we're going to enjoy that style of music this year. We try to explore a different style each year. And there will be a new reveal of some of the refreshed exhibits that the museum's committee has been working on. So please come by and see us. Both of those events are free. Both of them are bring your own chair if you want a comfy one. Sometimes we have some other chairs there too, but yours may be more comfy. We're expecting some food trucks and wonderful fellowship. It's going to be a great time to learn more about African American Music Month and Juneteenth together. But thank you all for giving me space in this program. Thank you for giving us your time and your wisdom and your experience. I hope that many people learn a lot from this conversation.
Thank you. And I'm going to share my information, I guess, with you all and make it available for people because I do this in other arenas.
Wonderful.
Yeah, we send out a kind of wrap up email, and like I said, in the next later today or tomorrow, as soon as the video processing finishes, with how to find people. We'll put all the links mentioned, links to Dr. Pinheiro's book. And are you still writing for Muster?
I am not. I'm currently working on 2 books at the same time, so I need a hobby.
Well, maybe I'll link to Muster anyway, because you have a bunch of work up there.
I will say, actually, just since you brought up Muster, one of the recent interviews I did was with a descendant from my book. So if you actually want to see how Black families are still fighting and the resistance is still strong, connecting to Black Civil War soldiers, read that Muster piece, because other than writing that book, that is the other thing I'm still proud of as a scholar, is that interview.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Muster is the blog of the Journal of Civil War history.
Yes, correct.
So yes, I can never remember Civil War or Civil War era because they're
Yeah,
essentially the same journal. Two different
exactly.
names. But yes, so it's interesting, historians write for the public all over the internet. So, but that's a really great place to read 19th century African-American and military history. So, all right, but I will send all those links out before the end of the day tomorrow. And I am so happy to have you all here. And thank you. And we're
Thank you.
going to close it off.
Thank
Thank
you for
you.
having us. Thank you for
all.
having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Mhm.
you all, and thank you guests for coming and hearing this just incredible, insightful conversation.
Thank you.
Hopefully we'll see you in September. Take
See you in
care.
September. Bye.
Bye-bye.